المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Before we actually start our program, a very blessed hour, the time of Maghrib, and we start off with dua, starting locally and then making it in general and universal terms for the Ummah of Muhammad ﷺ. The first dua locally is for one of the sisters who prays with us in the masjid regularly. Her parents are very ill. Her name is Sister Moha Tirma. Her mother has chronic kidney disease, and she asked that we make dua for her, and her father has liver cirrhosis, and we ask Allah Azza wa Jal to give them both shifa. Shahida Begum and Muhammad Abdul Mannan. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to give them full shifa and healing. Allahumma Rabban nas adhib al-ba's واشفي أنت الشافي لا شفاء إلا شفاءك اشفيهما شفاء لا يغادر سقما. نسأل الله العظيم رب العرش العظيم أن يشفيهما مما يؤذيهما. نسأل الله العظيم رب العرش العظيم أن يشفيهما مما يؤذيهما. نسأل الله العظيم رب العرش العظيم أن يشفيهما مما يؤذيهما. اللهم داوهما بدوائك واشفيهما بشفائك وردهما إلى كامل صحتهما برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. آمين آمين. We also make dua for our brother Javid Shaykh, who's been struggling with illness for some time now. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to give him a full shifa and recovery, and to restore his health, and to bring him back to the masjid in strength, and give him good health. Ameen. And then we also second this with a dua for our brothers and sisters in Pakistan who have been suffering from the monsoon floods, and as we mentioned earlier today in the khutbah, over 1,000 have passed away, and they say that over 30 million have been displaced from their homes, and billions of dollars in damage. So we ask Allah Azza wa Jal to accept those who passed away as shuhada, and to also to bring ease to the families that are suffering now from no home or shelter, and also suffering from hunger and other difficulties. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to give them shifa, and to give them afiyah and wellness. Allahumma ameen. اللهم فك الكرب عن إخواننا المستضعفين في باكستان. اللهم اجبر كسرهم. اللهم اجبر كسرهم وتقبل شهداءهم. اللهم تقبل شهداءهم. اللهم تقبل شهداءهم. اللهم ارحم موتاهم. اللهم اشف مرضاهم. اللهم اشف مرضاهم. اللهم اشف مرضاهم. اللهم اجبر كسر أمة حبيبك محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم في مشارق الأرض ومغاربها. فك الكرب عن كل مكروب من أمة محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. كل عبادك المستضعفين في سوريا وفي فلسطين وفي العراق وفي بورما وفي كشمير وفي الصين وفي اليمن وفي مصر وفي سائر بلاد المسلمين. أنت أعلم بهم منا، كلهم ناصرا ومعينا ومؤيدا وظهيرا. وأصلح حال أمة حبيبك محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم، وردنا إلى دينك مردا جميلا. آمين آمين. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين. And inshallah, once we begin our program for tonight, I do want to start the program from speaking a short reflection on Pakistan and what's happening there, and then going into the subject after that. But before we start, we want to start with a few announcements, inshallah, of the programs with Brother Naid.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome everyone to the Friday Forum. For those of you that are here for the first time, the Friday Forum is an event that happens every Friday night. It's a weekly event where our current topics are discussed. Tonight's topic is going to be about the problem of evil. Why does evil exist, and why do good people suffer? Just before we get started with the program, just two quick announcements. The first one is related to the 114 event. I think we've been announcing it several times here during the forum. Tonight is the last night to register for the 114 event. As we discussed, this is a spiritual and a physical challenge that involves racing at multiple intervals, and also Quran memorization. So tonight is the last night to register for the event. We encourage everyone to try to register if they're interested. And we also do have, in light of what's going on in Pakistan, there is a fundraising bake sale that will be held at the masjid. It will be next Jum'ah, inshallah, right after the Friday prayer next Friday, inshallah. We encourage everyone to come and support it. All of the funds collected, inshallah, will be going to the people in Pakistan. So I think with that we can get started with the program. We have Shaykh Osamah. We also have brother Ustad Ahmed here as well. He'll be engaging Shaykh Osamah in the discussion.
If I may add, this bake sale, by the way, is just an individual effort. It's actually not an effort that was started by the masjid as a masjid, but it was an inspired project by one of the sisters who prays with us. And it's a great idea, and this is something to hopefully inspire more projects like this. If you have a good idea that might help the ummah, might help the community, might do some sort of goodness for others, please come forward with it. This sister had this good idea, and inshallah anyone who contributes and volunteers with it, she'll get some reward. And whatever we could do, inshallah ta'ala, will not be lost by Allah. There was one other announcement. We actually don't have the flyer out yet, but I just wanted to start mentioning the program. It's been a while since we did Islamic courses at the masjid, and alhamdulillah we're going to be resuming that. And in the next few days you're going to see a flyer out for our first course that we're going to be restarting with. It's going to be on Tuesdays. It's going to be an intro to Quranic interpretation. It's going to be the tafsir of short surahs, Surah Al-Fatiha and Juz' Amma, inshaAllah. And it will be with tafsir, reflection, and the explanation of the verses and meanings, inshaAllah. So it's going to be on Tuesdays after Salat al-Isha, inshaAllah. Every Tuesday, and it's going to be starting mid-September. You should see the flyer coming out soon, inshaAllah. Jazakumullah khair.
All right, so we should get started now then? I guess we should start with the first question. So, so we introduced the topic already, I believe, right? A little bit. But I don't know, Shaykh, so I guess you want me to start with giving an overview of the problem of evil, or do you want to
Well, I did want to speak a little bit about Pakistan. That's what inspired the subject. So let me mention that and give you a little frame, and then let's get into the questions. Actually, we did something different this time. Actually, you see 3 of us here. And that's hopefully try so that we can, Ahmed and I can have a discussion, and Nail will be infusing our discussion with the questions you send. If you're on the WhatsApp group for the Friday Forum, it was sent out a few days ago, we want to hear your questions. And if you weren't, you could text that number, and Nail is going to get it right away. And whenever we have a question relating to the subject, about suffering, about trials, about difficulties, then inshallah he will interject and share with us the question. I guess where the idea came from for this subject is, like what we see happening in Pakistan now, we are constantly reminded of many tragedies that happen in this dunya. And sometimes when tragedies strike, it confuses people, it causes some doubts. Why does Allah allow this to happen? Why are there so many difficulties in life? Sometimes it feels like life isn't fair. Why do people who do all the wrong things seem to be getting many blessings in life? And why does it seem like sometimes when you're trying to be a good believer and you're trying to deal with life, so many challenges are thrown your way? It doesn't seem fair. And sometimes people will say this. They'll say this with their tongues. Life isn't fair. I didn't get a fair chance. I don't have the opportunities that other people have. I wish my life was like this person or like that person. Some people say things like this. And for me, I saw recently, and you guys should do this, I encourage this in general, whenever the ummah is afflicted with a tragedy, try to invest some time in exploring what's happening, because it'll touch your heart in a certain way. Yeah, you might hear in the masjid, oh, we're making dua for this country or that country, but if you do a little bit of investigation, it might trigger more empathy in your heart. Because if I have nothing to do with this country or that country, then perhaps I might not feel a reason to become emotionally invested. One scene that I saw, Akhi Ahmed, Akhi Nail, from coming out of Pakistan was, it was an old man, he was an old father. He was speaking about how he had 2 sons and a nephew. And as the flood came into their home, one of the walls collapsed on them. And one of his sons was able to escape, and the nephew, but the other one was pinned down under the wall, and he died. And he said he was speaking about the pain that his heart's going through for losing his son, and how it happened so fast. He's just shocked at how things played out, and he lost one of his sons. And when you see that, and then you see the images of people walking through, flooded areas, like many areas under the ground, and they're looking for food. One of the other stories I heard come out of the news is, in one of these areas of refuge, the people were complaining that there's no food. One of them even said that he's only been eating rice for the past several days. That's the only thing he was able to manage to get. And that whenever a batch of food comes, everyone comes around it, fighting to try to get something to sustain themselves. And when you see that, it just triggers a lot of emotion, or it should trigger a lot of emotion, because these are human beings. I have a life, and my life perhaps is nowhere near as difficult as many of the millions of people that are dealing with all kinds of suffering across the world. We as Muslims in the West, doesn't mean that we don't have difficulties. I'm not meaning to downplay anyone's difficulties. Yeah, we have our own trials. But we as Muslims in the West have a lot of opportunity. And with opportunities comes a lot of responsibility. And sometimes you might find someone, the whole world is at his disposal, her disposal. They could go to college, school if they wanted to. They could work and earn a living if they wanted to. They could, they have a great deal of freedoms. And they have a lot of means and opportunity along with that. And if I don't take advantage of that and appreciate the blessing that Allah has given me, then with this responsibility there's going to come a lot of accountability. So that's the 3 steps that I think of. Opportunity means responsibility. And responsibility, if not properly handled, is going to lead to a great deal of accountability. And we ask Allah Azza wa Jal to help us with that. There's a lot of wisdom behind hardships in life. And I think every single one of us deals with hardships on some levels. Those hardships might be in your wealth or in your health. It might be in your family. It might be some mental health issues you're going through. I need to be able to understand and contextualize these struggles. What's the point of them? Are they difficulties in actuality, or are they only perceived as difficulties in my mind? What role does my mind have in dealing with difficulties and trials? Because sometimes, and this is one of the verses we were citing in Salah, that sometimes, actually this is another surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes that sometimes there's a people who, whenever struck with a calamity, they treat it as though it's their end. يَحْسَبُونَ كُلَّ صَيْحَةٍ عَلَيْهِمْ قَاضِيَةً لَهُمْ. They think that every calamity, every trial they're going through, they have this very depressing, dramatic outlook on life that, oh, that's it, my life is ruined. I lost this, that's it, everything, there's no coming back from this. So I guess that's what inspired this, because, actually dealing with hardships and trials, Akhi Ahmad, is actually the primary vehicle we have to Allah. That's how I grow in my iman. That's how I grow in my understandings of life, actually. So I guess that's the framing of this subject. Difficulties, how should I perceive them? Why does evil exist? Why do good people sometimes suffer? And why do bad people sometimes seem to be prosperous? How can I really understand what's in my hand and what's out of my hand? What role does personal responsibility have to do with this? Right? When I am afflicted with something, how do I know it's a punishment from Allah or a blessing? Which one is it? I don't know. Sometimes I might get confused. Is it a blessing? Is Allah blessing me by putting me through this hardship? Or is it a punishment descending upon me? So hopefully that could spark the questions. And again, please feel free to text the questions here. And inshallah, that'll be the beginning of our discussion, inshallah.
Okay, so summarize there. I think I counted at least 3 important topics there. One is dealing with why is there suffering, period. 2, why does it seem that the suffering can seem unfair that it's happening to me and not as much as someone else. And 3, which is another problem, which we said is common a lot, is how do we deal with those of us, we see all this suffering happening around the world, and those of us that are not suffering a lot. I think those are 3 separate topics to go into. So I think those might be end results if we understand or get into the problem of evil a little bit in the beginning. So does it make sense to start at the beginning there about like attacking the problem of evil from the root of it?
Tackle it whatever way you want.
I think so. So I do think that's the best one, and I think we could start from the most extreme case, which is like the atheistic attack at, or not attack, we'll just call it the atheistic argument at this level. And it does get into the hearts of the Muslims. I think Muslims are hearing it every day, all the time now, which is just, why does evil exist at all? But even just more, because we know that there's, I think we can get into it, there's the answer of, for example, using the Khidr example, and well, what's bad actually means good in the end. I think we'll get into that. But then there's the deeper root question of, why didn't Allah just make it so the atheist's argument is he could have made it so that there was no test. You didn't have to go through anything. It could have just been all good for everyone all the time, like the angels, right? So I think, is that a good place to start?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, it's a good question. You bring up some good points, Akhi Ahmed. You guys know what he meant when he said the Khidr example? How many of you don't know what he meant? Raise your hand. Most of you know what he meant. That's awesome. That means you've heard some of the stories of Surah Al-Kahf. That, or you're too shy to say, I don't know. How many of you understood what he meant? Raise your hand. Okay, some of you are shy to raise your hands. Okay. What that meant was, it's in the end of Surah Al-Kahf, these stories actually teach us a lot about qadar and divine decree. Sometimes things aren't as they appear, right? You think something is good for you, but in actuality, in Allah's knowledge, He knows that it's bad for you. And sometimes you think something's bad for you, but it's actually a blessing in disguise. And life has shown us that all the time. Life has shown us that reality in many situations. Now when it comes to the problem of evil, why does evil exist? What's the easiest way to respond to this? Say that you could ask this question in a different way. Why did God create people with free will? Why does evil exist? I'll tell you a better question to ask. Why did Allah create people with free will? What does that mean? Meaning, if there's free will, that means there's a choice. And if people are going to have a choice between good and bad, goodness and badness, that means some may very likely choose wickedness. Now, the whole idea of there being free will is that corruption may come about upon the earth. And that's something that the Quran actually addresses. The angels said this. They said, أَتَجْعَلُ فِيهَا مَنْ يُفْسِدُ فِيهَا وَيَسْفِكُ الدِّمَاءِ Will you make upon its surface those who will cause corruption in it and shed blood? Now if you go back to the books of tafsir, why did the angels think this? There's a few different suggestions. One of those suggestions is that the jinn inhabited the earth before human beings, and that's what happened between them. The other suggestion is, the angels knew that free will meant that there will be those who do not choose guidance. They will choose misguidance. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in one of the surahs of the Quran, He actually says that people have been, the verse says, وَهَدَيْنَاهُ النَّجْدَيْنِ You guys know what surah that's in? What surah is it in? Come on. You know what surah it's in? What surah? Oh, mashallah, mashallah. One of the youngest attendees, he knows, Surah Al-Balad. وَهَدَيْنَاهُ النَّجْدَيْنِ What does it mean? We've guided him to the two paths. The path of goodness and the path of wickedness, right? So automatically we understand from that there are those who will choose misguidance. And Allah creating a creation that has free will is of the greatest signs of His magnificence, subhanah. That this creation, the human being, will have the will to overcome certain things within and do what's right. Now when we look at evil, we need to understand the following. Is Allah perpetrating evil against His creation? Our answer as believers to that would be what? Of course not. Of course not, right? But Allah, when we're talking about evil, we have something that is absolute evil and something that is actually a personal evil. So for example, the idea of having progeny and children. Is it something that's wicked in itself? The idea of having an inclination towards interacting with intimacy with the opposite gender, is it something evil in itself? No, of course not. That might actually lead to something very good and pleasant, and that is dhurriya, civilization, progeny. And then you have the personal evil that might come about when a human being does to another human being what we know as rape. وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ, an ugly action that brings out the worst of what humanity could do to each other. So that's, I think, something to reflect on. When it comes to debunking the problem of evil, we need to understand on one level that it's a product of free will. And on another level, this evil is perpetrated by human beings against each other, not God against humanity. And to that point, there's some other thoughts, because someone might say, well, doesn't God sometimes do things that are not fair to human beings? And there's a way to answer that, But I don't know if you have a follow-up to that. Feel free to jump in.
Yeah, well, basically that, and I think I remember even in reading one of your PowerPoints in that you separate. I forgot how you phrased it, but there was the evil that's done person to person, and then there's the harm or the pain that comes from natural disasters. It doesn't have to do with people, for example.
Yeah.
So I think that question could come. I think so. Maybe if you want to comment on that piece as well, the part that's not person to person.
Natural disasters, right?
Well, as an example, right?
Yeah. So now,
or just just a person falling down the stairs, for example, and pain, or cancer.
Cancer, or like someone being born with a disability, or some other disadvantage that sometimes people have. Is that fair or is it unfair? Well, it needs some unpacking. Because look, if I'm going to look at where I am in this dunya, then I'm always going to perceive that something isn't fair, because no two people have identical lives. Everyone has something different. Sometimes people have a financial disadvantage. Sometimes people have a academic or mental advantage over another person. Sometimes people have physical advantages over each other. There's actually a beautiful thing. So, what? Here's another thing. Sometimes people are born into Islam. Sometimes people are not. Sometimes people have to go through all kinds of atrocious things to finally realize the beauty of guidance. Someone might say, well, you know what? That's not fair, because so many people are born into Islam, and by nature of that, they become familiar with guidance, and so many other people may never come to the religion because they weren't born into it. So how is that fair? That's just like injustice, right? Sometimes people might look at that, but what our deen teaches is something else. Our deen teaches that it's not where you start, it's where you end. In fact, where you start is largely irrelevant. It's largely irrelevant. They say that ليست العبرة في من سبق إنما العبرة في من صدق. It's not about who gets there first, it's about who does it most sincerely. Sometimes it's not about where you start off, because there's a beautiful verse in the Quran that shows us this. The verse says in Surah At-Tawbah, it says, وَمِمَّنْ حَوْلَكُمْ مِنَ الْأَعْرَابِ مُنَافِقُونَ وَمِنْ أَهْلِ الْمَدِينَةِ. Allah tells us that there are those around you, some of them are from people of hypocrites, hypocrisy, nifaq. And even from the people of Medina during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, such proximity to truth. Proximity to truth doesn't always mean following it. We learned this from the Prophets, right? The Prophets, some of their children did not believe, like Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salam's son. So for someone to think that that's God doing injustice, I wasn't born into Islam, so many people aren't born into Islam, and hence they're not guided. That's not a fair way to think at all. No, not at all. And then on the other end, when it comes to those disadvantages that people, those outward disadvantages, like we said in health, wealth, or cognitive abilities, those aren't really disadvantages, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has custom tailored each person's trials for themselves. And sometimes you will find those most afflicted with the most profound perspectives on life. Right? You guys are with me? Sometimes you'll find those most afflicted with the most profound perspectives on life. Wallahi, it's true. I don't know if you've ever come across some people who have a lot of disadvantages, disabilities. You will find that it humbles them, it gives them clarity, it gives them purpose. Sometimes the one who's spoon-fed all the blessings in life, really is blinded by those blessings. I don't know if you want to jump in and say something, but you go ahead, Fadda.
No, for the record, I've been debating in my head back and forth for a while about how to attack this from the why does evil exist in the first place, or how does the balance equal out part first. It's very hard to do one. So I think my initial instinct that we should have attacked it from the Khidr angle first, because I think your answer was essentially answering a little bit of the Khidr angle, which is that there is a wisdom behind all that's bad. What seems bad isn't good. Essentially, the lesson from the story of Khidr, which is what you think is bad or you think it's unfair, you just don't know. Allah knows, and when you actually saw the full explanation of everything, you'd understand how much more, how fair it is, and it's just the limit of our knowledge, right?
Yeah, in other words, don't look at what you're going through. Look at how you're being impacted by it. I'll tell you this, you'll find that some of the people who complain most about the evil in the world are people who actually have it. They're very well off, they're not afflicted as much as some of those other people that have those disadvantages. You'll find when you go to poverty and you look at some of the people across the world who are impoverished, some of the people who are with special needs or disabilities, they'll humble us. Wallahi, they'll humble us at how innocent, pure, and sincere a perspective a person can have about life. Whereas that person who has it all, the ni'mah is all at his disposal, sometimes is very unappreciative of it. So I guess that's the two sides to the sword. Sometimes when you're given a lot of blessings, it blinds you. There's a verse in the Quran that actually says this. The verse says, وَلَوْ بَسَطَ اللَّهُ الرِّزْقَ لِعِبَادِهِ لَبَغَوْا فِي الْأَرْضِ. If Allah had given rizq and provisions in abundance to people, then sometimes it would lead them to transgress. Sometimes a blessing can actually lead to transgression and misguidance. And sometimes when Allah afflicts a person, it actually brings this person a lot closer to Allah. So instead of thinking about why is there evil, how about I think at how can this trial that I'm going through actually make me a better person? Because life, no matter which way you look at it, there's always disadvantages across the board. But the difference is in how people grow through those struggles. Wallahu a'lam. Do you have a question coming in?
So just one question came in terms of sometimes people do go through some struggles, and sometimes the struggles can be difficult. So one of the questions is, what are some steps that people can take not to fall into despair when they are going through some type of struggle or difficulty?
I think that's a beautiful question. I think that one of the steps that a person could possibly take to gain perspective on struggles is realizing the temporary nature of this dunya of ours. It's a temporary existence. If someone looks at life and thinks it's the be-all, end-all, then they'll be very depressed about what they go through and what's happening. But in actuality here, you want me to open it for you? This goes by Face ID, so we have different faces. So here you go. So if someone sees life as the be-all, end-all, it'll be absolutely depressing. But in fact, on the Day of Judgment, and this is one of the things that one of the blessings of revelation is, Allah tells us how people will feel about their trials on the Day of Judgment. Through revelation, the Prophet ﷺ tells us that on the Day of Judgment, the people of afiyah and well-being will wish that their skin was raked by iron rakes. لو قرضت جلودهم بالمقاريض. When they see what the people of affliction are getting, The people of affliction, see that's why sometimes the scales of people are very skewed. You know, there's a beautiful verse in the Quran that says this, that there are people who live and die and they only see the outer appearances of life. يَعْلَمُونَ ظَاهِرًا مِنَ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا وَهُمْ عَنِ الْآخِرَةِ هُمْ غَافِلُونَ. The outer appearances, the shell. I need to really break out of this, because largely this is about perspective. How can I really change, Akhi Na'il? I need to change my perspective about difficulties, about trials. And the way I could change that perspective is by seeing how things will end. On the day of judgment, people who were afflicted in this life will be given their ajr and reward in full. وَمَا رَبُّكَ بِظَلَّامٍ لِلْعَبِيدِ. Allah doesn't oppress people. You think that those hundreds of millions of people who are impoverished across the world, who are dealing with lack of opportunity, but still maintaining good faith and trust in Allah, and are struggling through this life with the difficulties that have been put in their way, you think that Allah is going to forget all their sacrifices? No, our belief is no. وَمَا كَانَ اللَّهُ لِيُضِيعَ إِيمَانَكُمْ. This is a verse that I need to memorize. Allah will never make your iman in vain. That trust, so changing perspective is one. Two is trusting Allah's plan. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chooses someone to be a martyr, dies in young age, due to tragic circumstances, drowning, or burns to death, or in a house collapsing upon them, we see the utter anguish on the outside. That's so painful. That's so tragic. It's so sad. But this person, their suffering actually stops as soon as the soul leaves the body. They don't have suffering after that. After that, the angels receive this person. The angels honor this person. So part of the problem is our perspective. We see the material realm. We don't see the spiritual realm. So those are three things that I would say should change the perspective. Allah, when He afflicts someone, He wants to give them a station in the Jannah, in the Akhirah, that they couldn't have reached with their actions. So He gives them trials, even big or small, to raise them up. The second way is to change perspective. So change perspective towards trials, and change perspective on the nature of life and what it is about. And the third thing is to trust in Allah's plan. Wallahu a'lam.
Jazakallah khair, Shaykh. So I think just to summarize, it's about perspective, also having trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So very interesting question came. So Shaykh, which is better? Is it better to live in suffering from evil and oppression, or is it better to live a life of comfort? It kind of goes back to your point about perspective, but which is better from, I guess, how should I say it, from an akhirah mindset?
Alright, so which is better is a really good question. Which is better, to live a life of suffering or to live a life of ease? Now, based on what I've said so far, what do you think the answer would be? Based on what I said, not what the answer actually is. What do you think? What would you guys say? It seems like we're saying a lot of good things about what? About suffering and about afflictions and trials. Some people might think, well, you want to say something? Go ahead.
Actually, I want to say that question exactly. The woman that came to Rasulullah and cannot Muslim.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or you could have patience and sabr.
Yes.
And be rewarded with Jannah. That's one thing that Rasulullah advised on, that suffering will lead to bitter consequences in the life after.
That's true. So here, you want to say something else?
The second thing is, like, when we're talking about trial and calamity, we have to look at it in terms. Sometimes it comes in macro level, and sometimes it comes in micro level. The macro level, what we see now happening in Pakistan, it's almost a complete nation. Or in micro, like you said, when somebody has
Personal test.
or cancer or something. So we cannot see like Rasulullah or what they said. If you know what's hidden, or طلعتم على الغيب فاخترتم الواقع. If you know what's hidden, you would have choose
Yeah, but let me summarize what you said so everyone could hear, because they can't hear all you're saying. Jazakallah khair. So he gave a few good examples, Jazakallah khair, Doctor, where the woman who came to ask the Prophet, she had epilepsy, and some of them said it was because of something else, because of Sara' al-Jinn. But in any case, she would have violent episodes where her body would shake from seizure, and that would lead to part of her body being exposed. So she came to the Prophet ﷺ, knowing that his prayers are answered, and she said, make dua for me. And he said to her, if you wish, you could be patient and you'll have Jannah, or I could make dua for you and it'll all go away because of the blessings of the prayer of the Prophet. So she said, I'll be patient, but please make dua that my body doesn't get exposed when I have these seizures. So he made that dua and that stopped. So that might lead one to believe that I should want suffering for myself. But the answer to this, of course, is no. The Prophet ﷺ in another hadith, he says, Salullah al-afiyah, ask Allah for afiyah and well-being. Never wish to be put in a difficult circumstance, because you don't know how you will react. Some people, when affliction comes their way, they disbelieve. I'll tell you, more than one situation that throughout, and I'm sure many of you perhaps know of your own stories, someone lost a loved one. They lost their mother, their father, or their children. They could not handle it. And they started saying things that would put their iman in question. Why did God do this to me? This isn't fair. If God existed, He wouldn't have taken my father away. Or so on and so forth. Those types of thoughts. Sometimes when someone is put in a deep trial, they don't know how they will react. So what's better, suffering or ease? What I should do is deal with it pragmatically. If ease comes my way, I should thank Allah Azza wa Jal for ease, and I should show that thanks not with my tongue, but with how I take advantage of that. And that's why we said blessings translate to responsibility, and responsibility will lead to accountability. If I take advantage of the blessing and give it its due right, then this is fadlullah. يُؤْتِيهِ مَن يَشَاءُ. This is the grace of Allah. However, if trials come my way, then I should train myself to be patient. There's another way to reword this question. What is easier, the trial of gratitude or the trial of patience? What do you think? The trial of gratitude or the trial of patience? Because everything is a matter of perspective, by the way. This mind of ours is its own realm, it's its own universe. So many things in life are about perspective, right? So what do you think, the trial of gratitude or the trial of patience? Which one's harder? Gratitude. How many of you say gratitude? Okay. Do any of you know why the trial of gratitude is harder? Why is it harder? Exactly. Jazakallah khair, Doctor. So it's all about perspective. When Allah puts this in my way, what is it going to do to me? I want wealth and I want prosperity. I wish I was a millionaire like this person or that person. I would do so many good things, right? There's actually verses in the Quran that show that the hypocrites had the same sentiment. وَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ عَاهَدَ اللَّهِ لَإِنْ آتَانَا مِنْ فَضْلِهِ لَنَصَّدَّقَنَّ وَلَنَكُونَنَّ مِنَ الصَّالِحِينَ. I don't have money now, right? One day when I become rich and well off, I'll start helping people in need. They promised Allah, if you give us of the bounty of this life, we're going to give charities and we're going to be of the righteous. فَلَمَّا آتَاهُمْ مِنْ فَضْلِهِ بَخِلُوا بِهِ. When they were actually given that, what their hearts desired, it actually turned them away from Allah. So they say the test of gratitude is more difficult than the test of patience, because there are so many reasons to be pushed away from remembering Allah. So that's the answer. Never wish for suffering. Never wish for suffering. Some people, they actually think that their own worship should be characterized by some sort of suffering. During the time of the Prophet ﷺ, there was a man he was an old man, and he made a covenant, an ahd with Allah, that he's going to fast while he's traveling, and that he will not break his fast even if the travel becomes very difficult. And this old man became very weak, and he could not stand, and he needed people to help him get to the destination. And the Prophet ﷺ saw this and he said, لَيْسَ مِنَ الْبِرِّ الصِّيَامُ فِي السَّفَرِ. It is not of benevolence to fast in such a manner where it afflicts your body and causes you immense hardship that leaves you on the verge of fainting. No, that's not what worship's about. It's not about torturing yourself. You should not want suffering for yourself. Sometimes some people will do stuff like that. So it's not about that. Hold yourself accountable. Don't get me wrong. Try to push yourself to your limits, but in the end of the day, the believer never wants or searches for suffering.
So we've been receiving the same question several times, Shaykh and Brother Ahmad. How do you know? How do you know if you're being in a difficult state, you're going through a difficult trial? How do you know if this is a punishment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or this is a way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in Allah's love for you, and He's putting you through a trial to in a way of love?
It's a very good question that regularly comes our way. Now, isn't everything written down in qadar and divine decree? Isn't everything written already by Allah Azza wa Jal? Answer to this, yes or no? Everything's written, right? My action. Someone said no? Alright, who said no? Explain. Anyone? Anyone want to explain? Alright, maybe they don't want to explain. There's too many people in the room. But anyway, everything's written. Alright, my actions, what role do they play then? So this is the confusing thing. We believe in Allah's qadar and divine decree, right? Now, my actions are happening now. So, do my actions lead to the results, or does divine decree lead to those results? Which one is it? Or is it a third response? How would you guys answer this? Someone raise your hand. You answered a lot, Doctor. We want everyone. There's 100 people here. Someone got to raise their hand. Someone. Anyone? Right here, go ahead. Your actions lead to their results? Okay, then what's the role of divine decree? Is it just not there for certain things? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We don't know the decree, it's there, but our actions are what lead to those decrees, and Allah knows our actions. Good response. Now here, there's something to understand about qadr, because a lot of people get qadr confused. In fact, you'll find someone, who's going like 90 miles per hour on the highway. I hope no one does this here, but inshallah, 90 miles per hour or 100 miles per hour, whatever it is, and they get this massive ticket, and they got to go to court. Or you know what? Worse, it's written down as reckless driving. And if you do this in Virginia, I don't know what's this law in New Jersey, but I know about Virginia for a certain reason. I won't tell you guys about. But so anyway, if you do it in Virginia, if it's over a certain speed limit, they'll arrest you on the spot. And the guy's in his jail cell and he's saying, قدر الله ما شاء فعل. It's Allah's decree. Khair inshallah, I'm sorry, this and that. Is this proper logic? Or a fool who does something worse? He ends up costing someone their life because of their reckless driving. Or someone who does something else and says, you know what, Allah willed it to happen this way. Right? This is disrespect with Allah, of course. To deflect our bad deeds and say, you know what, it's Allah's doing. That's like me, that's something satanic, because Shaitan did this. Shaitan said, فَبِمَا أَغْوَيْتَنِي. You caused me to be deviated, and that's why I didn't prostrate. So that's very satanic logic. So how do you get out of this? In actuality, there is something called qada' mubram and qada' mu'allaq. There is affirmed decree, and then there's conditional decree. What does this mean? There are certain things in this life that Allah decreed will happen. They're constants. These things will come to be and come to pass. And there are many, many other things that are conditional decree, qada' mu'allaq. And what does that mean? That Allah knows all of the probabilities. They say a beautiful statement about Allah. They say He knows what happened what will happen, what is happening, and what didn't happen. If it had happened, how would it have happened? He knows all the probabilities, subhanah. So there are certain doorways. I'm at a juncture and I need to make a decision. This decision will lead to that, that decision will lead to that, and that decision will lead to a third thing, right? This is conditional decree. That there are possible outcomes, of course, like our sister said. He knows the outcomes, but this is dependent on our actions. That's why there's a hadith that says, وَإِنَّ الْعَبْدَ لَيُحْرَمُ الرِّزْقِ بِالذَّنْبِ يُصِيبُهُ. Sometimes someone's denied part of their sustenance because of a sin they committed. Something was written for them, but then it's taken away from them because of something they did. And you know what? Sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes afflictions are waiting to come to this person. But because of a dua of someone in need, because they helped someone in a great trial and difficulty, because they were benevolent to their mother or their father, Allah pushes away those trials from them. Because they gave a charity, because of kada. So that's conditional decree. So never ever think, because there was a sect in the history of our ummah that actually was misguided because of this. They thought simply, well, you know what? That everything's in Allah's hands. I'm like a risha fil hawa. I'm like a feather in the wind. Wherever the wind blows me, I go. I have no say in the matter. No, there's personal responsibility. So that's the reality. So, وَمَا أَصَابَكُم مِّن مُّصِيبَةٍ فَبِمَا كَسَبَتْ أَيْدِيكُم. Whatever affliction that comes your way is from what you did. وَيَعْفُوا عَنْكَ. That's one ayah. I can't take one ayah and then forget the others, right? There's another verse that says, مَا أَصَابَ مِن مُّصِيبَةٍ إِلَّا بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ. No affliction strikes except by the will of Allah, by the decree of Allah. So what's the way to balance this? There's personal responsibility, and then there's things that are completely out of my role. Now, if it's something that I did, I need to be responsible for it. Inshallah, I'm going to come to your question right now. If it's something out of my hand, then this is a test from Allah. And how do I know if it's a test or a punishment? Well, how do I react? Does it make me a better person? Does it humble me? Does it cause me to turn to Allah in prayers? Does it cause me to become more refined in my understandings about life? If the answer is yes, then that's your answer right there. Right? That's your answer. How do you react to it? That's how you know if it's a trial or a punishment, right? So can anyone say, right now, for example, the thing that happened in Pakistan, can anyone say that that's a punishment from God because of corruption? Can anyone say that? Can anyone say that? Yes or no? No one could say that, right? Let's go back a little further. You guys remember the tsunami that hit Indonesia and Sumatra and those areas? You guys remember that? Raise your hands if you remember it. You remember it? A lot of people remember it. Was that a punishment from God to the people of Indonesia? Was it a punishment from God? What do you think? Yes or no? Maybe? So some people at that time, what did they say? You find a lot of khutab and durus sometimes, because you know what those powerful khutbahs, the ones that say, oh, this is God's punishment to this. Those things, they get a lot of views on the internet, right? You can't say something like that. How do I know if it's a punishment? Look, we have different types of punishment. We have the sana amma, some affliction, general affliction that would strike a people and destroy them, like the people of Lut, or the people of Ad, or the people of Nuh. Those things stopped happening. Allah doesn't punish people like that anymore. Then now we have the messages, and people are either punished or reward based on an individual basis. But the halak of al-umam, this was something of the past. Now, was it a punishment? We cannot say in general it was a punishment. But it might be a punishment for some people and a reward for others. Now here's the answer. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala causes the demise of a person and they're not ready for it, and they're in a very bad state, then this person has su'ul khatimah. That's an awful thing. Like someone dies doing a sin. That's an awful thing. That's a punishment, right? Like, and then on the other end, if someone is praying and worshipping Allah and going out to earn a living, because this causes a lot of pain. You're talking about one of the most inhabited Muslim countries in the world, Indonesia. You say Allah punished those people? Oh, are you kidding me? Yeah, go ahead. You want to say something? It seems like you really want to say it. Go ahead, say it.
So basically, parts of Indonesia, I've been to Indonesia. So parts of Indonesia, they're very open-minded, they're like Westernized.
Okay, Western. Are you Westernized? Oh, you live in the West. What does Westernized mean? What? Uh-oh.
If you go to Bali, right? If you go to Bali, everything is opened up, everything is like all kind of fitness.
Yes.
The other side of Indonesia,
Uh-huh.
it's completely different, the opposite.
Yes.
So if you go to Jakarta and all those areas, you will see it's completely different.
Okay.
More humble, and those things are non-existent. But if you go towards the south, you will see a lot of things happening.
Uh-huh.
But now, when the tsunami happened, that area got severely struck.
Uh-huh.
And the majority of the destruction was on that area. So, I don't know.
That's not a good way to think about it, Akhi. And the reason for this, I'll tell you why it's not a good way to think about it is, alright, now someone might come and say, and I heard this is so sad, it's so sad. I remember I was in Egypt, and we had one of the Syrian refugees, very, very humble person. He was a student of knowledge, and he came one day and he sat with us, and he was hard. And this is nothing against Egyptians, by the way. I lived in Egypt for 8 years, and mashallah, Masr Dunya. But anyway, he came so sad one day, and I told him, why are you so sad? He said, there was this guy, he found out I was from Syria, and then he started saying to me, you guys must have done something awful for God to punish you like that. You guys must deserve it. What happened to you, the civil war in Syria? Some people think in such awful manners. You can't think like that about people. That's not a right way to think. Now, Allah judges people individually. Like if we want to use that logic, basically what I'm saying, Akhi, and the rest of you guys, if we want to use that logic, that means we're going to speak about matters of the unseen with certainty we don't have. That's only known to Allah. Who He punishes and who He rewards, and how He punishes them and how He rewards them, that's only known to Allah. Now, is it possible that some people were punished by this and other people were rewarded by it? Yes, that's possible. But can I say that? No, I cannot say that. I can't. Because you might have had an innocent Muslim who was just going to work that day, and he happens to be in a lousy city that's full of obscenities. By the way, we live in America, okay? So he might be in a place that is full of obscenities, and he's just going about his business, providing for his family. To say that Allah punished these people? No. This is التألي من التألي على Allah. Yeah. You wanted to say something earlier, brother. Yes. Yes. Yeah, no, absolutely. Allah will never be unjust to His slaves. That's why He says, وَمَا كُنَّا مُعَذِّبِينَ حَتَّى نَبْعَثَ رَسُولًا. We will never punish until we send a messenger. That's the litmus test for accountability. Was a messenger sent? Then after that, how did people react? Wallahu a'lam. Yeah. You want to say something? Go ahead. Exactly.
This might be like something that we think about as punishment. It might actually be just a test. So like those people are
exactly. Perhaps Allah would test someone He loves. You think Allah wants pain for people? Does Allah want pain for? No. But sometimes the most bitter things in life teach me the most about life. There's a beautiful quote that I mentioned. We forgot about you two guys. I'm sorry, man. There's a beautiful quote that we mentioned that says, رُبَّمَا أَعْطَاكَ فَمَنَعَكَ. Perhaps Allah has given you but denied you. And perhaps He's denied you but has actually given you. Things aren't as they seem. Never ever deal with your life on just the surface and the outer shell. If that was the case, then the Prophet ﷺ would say, should be the one saying this. The Prophet ﷺ, if you know about his life, you know that he dealt with loss after loss after loss all throughout. He dealt with the loss of his father at his birth, and then his mother when he was still very young, and then he was sent to his uncle, his grandfather, and then his uncle, and then after that when he had children, all of his children died during his life except one. Who? Sayyidah Fatima. When did she die? 6 months after. 6 months after. That's who the Prophet ﷺ was. That's what he had to deal with. That's not easy when you think about that. You wanted to say something, Hajj Uthman, تفضل. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yeah, so Jazakallah khair. So he mentioned about a verse in the Quran, ظهر الفساد في البر والبحر بما كسبت أيدي الناس. Corruption has become apparent in the land and sea because of what people have done. This is part of that personal evil. And you know, if you go read up on this, this is من الشر الذي يقترفه الناس بعضهم على بعض. If you go read up on this, like if you look at our food source and what's happening to that, you know, like why is everyone dying from cancer in their 20s and 30s and 40s now? Go read up on it. Like what's in the food that we're eating? Unfortunately, may Allah forgive us. And all those the corrupt things that are in our food source, and the contaminants. There are certain things like if you go read up on them, that people are being fed things that are carcinogenic, that lead to cancer. And this is under the watch of many. People are dying from diseases that are sometimes triggered by the actions of human beings and the way that the crops are dealt with. Why do you think that we have this new trend of looking into organic things and non-GMOs and and all that stuff? Why is that? Because there's a growing level of awareness now that there's a lot of corruption out there. When you look at the medical industry and the corruption that's there, there's tons of corruption there. It's a lot of it is about profit. Sometimes people do things in the medical field. Can you imagine? This is not meaning, there's not a shot against doctors. There's many amazing doctors, many amazing and absolutely sincere and giving doctors. But you'll find this is part of that fasad. ظهر الفساد في البر والبحر بما كسبت أيدي الناس. The corruption in the food source and the water source because of what people have done to each other is personal evil. When I see what's happening in Syria, is this Allah doing it to people? No, this is corrupt people doing it to other people. Why does Allah allow it to happen? Why does Allah allow it to happen? Look, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, don't look at things on a shallow level. This person you see brutally killed and losing their spouse or losing their parents or losing their children, don't look at it like that. Allah will preserve their ajr and give them the ajr of shahada and raise them up, and He'll punish the person who did it to them and the one who perpetrated that evil against them. There's so many things that are happening in the world, we just see a very surface level. We just see a very surface level when it comes to a lot of the discussions. And sometimes people say these are conspiracy theories about what's happening behind the scenes that is causing a lot of damage to humanity, damage to the earth, damage to civilization. Then on the Day of Judgment, it's a big day of hisab. So that's how I respond to this. Yeah, the Sayyidina Umar, he did say that about the earthquake. And the Prophet ﷺ even told us this. The Prophet one time, there was storms coming. They were brewing and the clouds were coming closer to Medina. The Prophet ﷺ got very nervous. And he began pacing back and forth. And the color of his face changed. And Sayyidah Aisha looked at him and said, "Why are you acting like this, O Prophet of Allah?" And he said to her, "How do I know it's not the clouds that were brewing that came and ruined the people of Ad?" Now the Prophet ﷺ knows that he will not be ruined. وَمَا كَانَ اللَّهُ لِيُعَذِّبَهُمْ وَأَنْتَ فِيهِمْ. They're not going to be punished while you're among them. But the Prophet's teaching us something important, reflection. He's teaching us to recognize the power of Allah's doing in nature. But is He ever teaching us to begin speaking about the unseen regarding fulan and fulan, fulan ila jahannam wa fulan ila adhabillah wa sakhatillah? No, I can't do this. La astati'. This is not something that I can do. I can't speak of things that are only known to Allah, that are from the unseen realm. Wallahu a'lam.
Can I comment on two things?
Sure.
One, so on the personal level, I had been taught that at an individual level, the best that to figure out whether it's a test or a punishment, that we should all assume that it's a punishment when something happens to us and at an individual level. That the prophets can be certain that that was a test, right? And I don't know, maybe you want to add the 10 that were promised Jannah and maybe a group above that. But for the most part, I mean that most of us should not feel secure that we are so good that it's a test and that it's not a punishment. We should be looking for what can I do better, what can I do better for Allah to clear out of this. Is that a faulty way to look at it?
Sort of faulty, because there's something called self-loathing. Self-loathing, you guys know self-loathing? Self-loathing, people fall into depression because of thinking like that. You need to be very careful with that line of thinking. So Allah doesn't want us to be a people who have a sense of security. Al-amnu min makrillah is one of the diseases of the heart. Feeling that you're secure from Allah, punishing you or testing you or something like that. No. I'm not going to do that. Yeah, I'm always going to push myself to become better. But I should be very careful of self-loathing. Self-loathing is that thing that you do when you look at your life and you see, oh man, I've been trying to get married for the past 10 years and it never works out. Or you know what, man, everyone in my class seems to be ahead of me. They all got married, they all have careers, and they all seem happy, but I'm not happy. Or oh man, I'm wishing for a child and I've tried so much with my spouse, but it hasn't been working. And then what do you start doing? Man, maybe I'm an awful human being. Maybe Allah hates me. Maybe that's why nothing's working out. That I must have done something and I'm not worthy of Allah's forgiveness. And you know what? Someone will start pushing this. The shaitan will come in and make this thought push further. You know what? I've done so many things in my life, and I just don't think I'm worthy of Jannah. I don't think I'm Jannah worthy. You know what? What's the point of me praying anyway? It's not like I'm sometimes a mother or father will be angry at their son or daughter and they'll say, I don't know why you're praying anyway. Why are you praying? It's not like Allah's going to accept from you. I'm not pleased with you. Allah's not going to accept it. Sometimes those are some of the stories that, these aren't random thoughts. They're coming from the lives of people. A lot of people come with these types of problems. So, we need to be careful from self-loathing. Don't ever allow the shaitan to convince you of that. That Allah hates me and that's why I'm going through tough stuff. In fact, you guys know the story of the two gardens? You know the story of the two gardens? You guys know it? What did he say? He says, the guy had a very prosperous plot of land. Everything was all good. And he says, وَمَا أَظُنُّ السَّاعَةَ قَائِمَةً I don't believe in this day of judgment. What are you talking about? وَلَئِنْ رُجِعْتُ إِلَىٰ رَبِّي لَأَجِدَنَّ خَيْرًا مِنْهَا مُنْقَلَبًا And if I go to a day of judgment, I must be doing something right. Everything's going great. I have a lot of money. I have a lot of kids. I must be doing something right. God must be pleased with me. You know what they call this? They call this prosperity doctrine. Prosperity theology. That's what they call this. If I do everything between me and Allah right, that means that should translate to me having a happy life. In Islam, we don't believe in this. Some other religions, they might say this, that your status by God will translate to your status in this life. No, of course, Islam, we don't believe this at all. There's two verses in Surah Al-Fajr. Let's see if anyone knows them. About trials. Anyone know these two verses? Give us perspective on trials. Raise your hand if you know the two verses. You know them? No, yeah, that's the second verse. Yeah, good job, mashallah. وَالْفَجْرِ وَلَيَالٍ عَشْرٍ What's the two verses I'm talking about? They're about trials. Raise your hand. Anyone? I'll give you the beginning. Of course you know it. I'll give you the beginning of it. فَأَمَّا الْإِنسَانُ إِذَا مَبْتَلَاهُ رَبُّهُ فَأَكْرَمَهُ وَنَعَّمَهُ Do you know it? You know it? Say it. Well, I'm sorry, it's okay. When the person, you want to say it in the back? Go ahead. فَأَكْرَمَهُ وَنَعَّمَهُ Good. Gada. Jazakallah khair. This is prosperity theology. When the human being is given goodness in life, he says that Rabbi akramani, Allah has honored me, He's given me good things in life. وَأَمَّا إِذَا مَبْتَلَاهُ فَقَدَرَ عَلَيْهِ رِزْقَهُ فَيَقُولُ رَبِّي أَهَانًا. When Allah takes away from him, oh, my Lord has humiliated me. My life sucks. I have an awful life. It's not fair. Why did Allah do this to me? All of these thoughts are right from the shaitan's mouth. Right from the shaitan's mouth into this person's heart. وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ.
And I guess not to go too much in the back and forth with that, but it could be, so then if the thought is Allah hates me and that's why He's doing this, then that could be the misguided
self-loathing,
thought.
yeah.
But if the thought is more, this is Allah loves me and He's correcting me and He's doing this to purify me and to give me a chance to be guided, right? So in that kind of a sense, if it's looked upon as the hardship, as this is something that's going to make me better.
Yeah, if it's that positive perspective, then yeah. I would agree with that.
And then just the same part about, so then on the mass level, so I think it gets tricky when you talk about individual events like the Indonesia event or, the Pakistan event. But I think the perspective might be coming off that, like, for example, if you look at the Muslim Ummah overall today, that we can't attribute the horrible shape it's in to anything that the people have done, right? And I guess I just want to ask if that's if this philosophy of not trying to interpret Allah's why good and bad happen too much is the case there. And I guess because one hadith that's always used, I think, for this time, I think it's probably my favorite hadith of the times right now, right? The one about the froth of the sea. That the people will soon summon one another to attack you from every place in the same way that a pack, this is a hadith from Rasul that he said, that people will soon summon one another to attack you from every place in the same way that a pack calls around its prey. Someone asked, will that be because of our small numbers at the time? He replied, no, you'll be very numerous at the time, but you will be like the foam of the river. And Allah will take the fear of you from the hearts of your enemy, and will cast al-wahn into your hearts. And they said, oh Messenger of Allah, what is al-wahn? And he replied, love of world, and love of the dunya, and dislike of death.
Yeah.
So that hadith is always used a lot as as a rationale for why we're the state are we. So is that? So I'll just leave it there, I guess, if you want to.
Yeah, look, so what I meant by, there's a direct hadith that says that the Prophet ﷺ says that Allah promised me not to send punishment upon my ummah from above. أَلَّا يَأْخُذَهُمْ بِسَنَةٍ عَامَّةٍ. That affliction will come and wipe out the ummah or part of the ummah. That method of punishment is not there anymore. That was for the previous nations. So that's why I said what I said about those particular incidents. And not to mention, because those situations where halak al-ummam, they had particular circumstances. The Prophet was told to leave, and then the punishment came soon after that. But is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala perhaps sending difficulties the way of Ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam because of corruption? That's possible. Yeah. The difficulties because of the doings of our own hands is something that is always possible. So we should always, push ourselves to become better in that regard. Wallahu a'lam. Are there any other questions that are coming from over there, Nail? We only have a few minutes, like 5 minutes before we stand for salah.
So one interesting question, it's related to, it's more I guess a hypothetical question, but it's about fairness. What if someone is killed during a time they were not in the peak of their deen, but they had intentions in the future to be good? How is that fair? Okay, does Allah give Jannah to this person because of their intentions or because of the goodness He saw in their future? Does that count for the person?
Look, when it comes about the essence of punishment and reward, we only know glimpses of that. We can never speak with certain about a person and their status in the akhirah. Sometimes you might hear of a story of someone who committed suicide, or they were depressed and they took their life, or they overdosed on something. Can you really pass judgment and say that this person is going to be for certain in hellfire, you can't do that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows all of the factors and the elements. We know in general how people will be held accountable in general, between doing kaba'ir and sagha'ir, between believing and disbelieving, major sins, minor sins. We know general stuff. But the essence of punishment and reward about fulan or fulana, I can't say. This person, Allah knows their intention. We know that the greatest hallmark of sincere faith comes about in the person's khatima. When Allah knows, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes the life of His servant, He gives some people the gift of husn al-khatima. There's a hadith that says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ إِذَا أَحَبَّ عَبْدًا اسْتَعْمَلَهُ. When Allah loves someone, He uses them. They said, what does it mean He uses them? He said, يُوَفِّقُهُ لِعَمَلٍ صَالِحٍ. He guides him to a righteous deed before his death, and then He makes that his last act. So that's a blessing from Allah. If someone passed away in questionable circumstances, I'm going to zip my mouth and leave that to Allah. It's none of my business. I don't know how He'll punish His servants, and I don't know how He'll reward them. Allahu a'lamu bihalih. Yeah. Any other question?
Just one, I think just in concluding, someone is asking, are there any specific dua or any ad'iyah just that to ask Allah just to alleviate suffering, or just to help people, to protect people from difficulties and trials?
Yeah, there's a bunch of them. The Prophet ﷺ, by the way, during his lifetime, would constantly make dua, would constantly make dua for husn al-khatimah. And he taught us to do this. Make dua always for having a beautiful end to your life. There's actually another dua, it's beautiful. It's a hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, he says, to say, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min zawali ni'matik. I seek refuge in you, O Allah, from the diminishment of your blessings. وَتَحَوُّلِ عَافِيَتِكَ. And for my condition of well-being to be switched to another. وَفُجَاءَةِ نِقْمَتِكَ. And for me to be struck suddenly by your punishment. وَجَمِيعِ سَخَطِكَ. And I seek refuge in you from all of your wrath. So this is a dua the Prophet ﷺ taught us to say. And again, look, this is a really important subject. There's so many things but it all goes back to perspective and attitude. Inshallah, I'll let you comment. But it all goes back to perspective and attitude. Don't ever think if Allah puts trials in your life, that means it's because He hates you. No, not at all. There are certain muscles that only get flexed when you're in bitter circumstances and situations. If things are easy, then I'm not going to learn much about life. Wallahu alam, that's the Muslim's attitude towards suffering. You wanted to say something? Tfaddal. Yes. بكلمات الله التامات من شر ما خلق. تمام. Jazakallah khair. Allah barik feek. So he reminded us of two more du'as. One of them is the dua of Sayyidina Yunus alayhi salam. And that is, La ilaha illa ant subhanak inni kuntu min al-zalimin. There's no deity worthy of worship except you alone. Subhanak, exalted are you. I was of the wrongdoers. The Prophet ﷺ, he said that whenever a believer makes this dua, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will remove that sense of hem and difficulty and alleviate that trial at least from their mind. It's one thing to be afflicted, it's another thing entirely to fall prey to that affliction. You get what I'm trying to say? It's one thing to be tested on the outside, it's another thing to fail and fall prey in that trial. You might find someone that they're tested on the outside, but their heart's really strong on the inside. And that's what really matters. We don't get to choose what happens to us in our lives in many situations. Sometimes we get a choice. That's where personal responsibility comes. But we don't get to choose. But we always get to choose how we decide to react to it. And I think that's the important thing to take to heart here. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. And now it's time for Salat al-Isha. So we could stop here inshallah, and we'll have adhan and then iqama right after that. Jazakumullah khair, subhanakallah wa hamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله